The letter arrived just as the spring sun began to stretch its golden fingers across the dusty main street of Yosemite, California. Frank Holloway stood on the porch of his ranch house, weathered hat in hand, squinting at the horizon where the stagecoach would soon appear. His heart hammered against his ribs like a wild Mustang fighting against a new bridle, the folded paper in his pocket feeling heavier than a six-shooter. It was 1875, and Frank had done what many lonely frontier men did, advertised for a mail-order bride in the Eastern newspapers. After 5 years of solitude following his parents' passing, the 28-year-old rancher had finally admitted he couldn't manage the sprawling cattle operation alone, nor did he want to. He'd corresponded with a Miss Sophia Andrews from Boston for 6 months before proposing marriage through the mail. She had accepted, and today she would arrive. What Frank hadn't anticipated was the telegram that had reached him 3 days prior. Arriving Thursday, stop circumstances, changed stop bringing 3 sisters, stop please advise if problem, stop Sophia Andrews. In his haste and excitement, Frank had immediately replied, "No problem, stop welcome all, stop Frank Holloway." Now, as dust rose from the approaching stagecoach, Frank wondered if he'd been too hasty. "They're coming," shouted Timothy, the 12-year-old son of his ranch hand, who'd been perched on the fence waiting for the first sign of the coach. Frank straightened his blue Sunday shirt, brushed dust from his trousers, and adjusted his freshly trimmed beard. The Holloway Ranch was one of the more prosperous operations in Yosemite Valley, with a sprawling 2-story main house that his father had built with dreams of filling it with children. Those dreams had never materialized for his parents, but perhaps now. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The driver, old Ezekiel Jones, tipped his hat to Frank with a knowing smile. "Got yourself some precious cargo today, Holloway." The door swung open, and Frank held his breath. A gloved hand appeared, followed by a woman in a dusty blue traveling dress. She stepped down cautiously, her honey blonde hair partially visible beneath a modest bonnet. When she looked up, Frank found himself staring into the clearest green eyes he'd ever seen. "Mr. Holloway." Her voice carried a refined Eastern accent, but there was steel beneath its softness. "Miss Andrews." Frank removed his hat and stepped forward. "Welcome to Yosemite. Thank you for your generosity in accommodating my unexpected situation." She turned to help another young woman descend from the coach. "This is my sister, Margaret." Margaret Andrews couldn't have been more than 19, with the same blonde hair as Sophia but with deeper blue eyes and a rounder face. She curtsied nervously. 2 more young women followed, one with auburn hair who appeared to be about 17, and a girl who couldn't be more than 15, with blonde curls and eyes wide with both fear and excitement. "My sisters, Elizabeth and Catherine," Sophia explained. "Our parents passed within weeks of each other this winter. Influenza, I couldn't leave them." Her voice broke slightly, but she straightened her shoulders. "I understand if this changes things between us." Frank looked at the 4 women standing before him, their few trunks and bags being unloaded by Ezekiel. Sophia's chin was held high, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was prepared to be turned away, he realized, prepared to protect her sisters at any cost. "Miss Andrews, Sophia," Frank said, stepping closer, "my home has stood too empty for too long. You and your sisters are most welcome here." Relief flooded her face, though she maintained her composure. "We won't be a burden, Mr. Holloway. We all know how to work." "Frank, please," he smiled. "And I don't doubt that for a moment." Timothy had already begun helping with the luggage, his eyes darting curiously between the 4 new arrivals. "This is Timothy," Frank explained. "His father, Robert, is my foreman. You'll meet him and the other hands at supper." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Timothy," Sophia said warmly, which made the boy blush furiously. As they walked toward the house, the youngest sister, Catherine, gasped. "It's like a castle," Frank chuckled. "Hardly that, but my father built it with grand ambitions." The Holloway ranch house stood 2 stories tall with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. White painted wood gleamed in the spring sunshine, and curtains fluttered at open windows. A large oak provided shade for half the yard, where a swing hung from a sturdy branch. "It's beautiful," Margaret whispered. "It's yours now," Frank replied, then quickly corrected himself when he saw Sophia's blush. "I mean, it's your home, all of you." Sophia looked up at him, studying his face. "You're very kind, Mr. Holloway." "Frank, I hope we haven't imposed on that kindness too much." "Not at all." He held the door open. "I've prepared rooms for everyone. I hope they'll be comfortable." As the sisters entered the house, their exclamations of delight made Frank's chest swell with pride. The interior was well kept, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and his mother's touches still evident in the curtains and quilts. "Mrs. Patterson from town comes twice a week to help with cleaning," Frank explained. "She'll be here tomorrow. She's eager to meet you all." Sophia nodded, taking everything in. "When do you wish to discuss our arrangement?" Frank understood immediately. "There's no rush, Sophia. You've had a long journey. Get settled. Rest. We can talk tomorrow or the next day." Relief softened her features. "Thank you." That evening, Frank and Timothy helped the sisters settle into their rooms. The house had 5 bedrooms, the master bedroom where Frank's parents had once slept, and he now occupied, 3 more upstairs and 1 downstairs that had been converted into a study. Frank immediately offered to move into the study so each sister could have her own room. "That won't be necessary," Sophia insisted. "Catherine and Elizabeth can share, and Margaret and I as well. We're accustomed to it." "If you're certain," Frank conceded. "But if you change your mind, the offer stands." Supper that night was a lively affair. Robert, the foreman, and his wife Ellen joined them, along with 3 of the ranch hands who typically took meals at the main house. Ellen had prepared a feast to welcome the newcomers: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Frank noticed how Sophia watched everything with careful eyes, how she made sure her sisters ate before taking much herself, how she answered questions politely but revealed little. She was protective, wary. He respected that. Later that night, after everyone had retired, Frank sat on the porch watching the stars when he heard the door open behind him. Sophia stepped out, now wearing a simple gray dressing gown over her nightdress, her hair in a long braid over one shoulder. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said softly. "Not at all." Frank stood quickly. "Is everything all right? Do you need anything?" She shook her head and moved to stand beside him at the porch railing. "I wanted to thank you properly without an audience. What you're doing for us. It's extraordinary. It's nothing that wouldn't be expected of any decent man," Frank replied. "We both know that's not true." Sophia's voice was gentle but firm. 4 women arriving unannounced would test the patience of a saint, let alone a man expecting only a wife. Frank turned to face her. In the silver moonlight, she looked ethereal, her profile delicate against the backdrop of the mountains. "May I ask what happened? In your letters, you never mentioned sisters." Sophia sighed. "I'm the eldest of 4 daughters. Our father was a professor of literature at Harvard. He and our mother both fell ill this past winter. Within 3 weeks, they were both gone." Her voice wavered, but she continued. "I had already agreed to marry you, and I had set aside money for my journey west, but suddenly I was responsible for 3 young girls." "You could have written to break our agreement," Frank said softly. "I considered it," she admitted. "But our options in Boston were limited. What little money our parents left wouldn't last long. I would have had to find work, and my sisters. She shook her head. Margaret might have found a position as a governess, but Elizabeth and Catherine are still so young. So you decided to bring them west, she nodded. I wrote to you expecting you to withdraw your offer. Most men would have. I'm not most men. Frank smiled gently. And honestly, this house has been too quiet for too long. Still, I understand this isn't what you agreed to. Sophia turned to face him fully. I want to be clear, I still intend to honor our arrangement to be a good wife to you, but my sisters will always be my responsibility. They're mine now too, Frank said firmly, if you'll still have me as a husband. Something softened in Sophia's expression. You know so little about me. I know what was in your letters, Frank countered. I know you're educated, thoughtful, and brave enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger. I know you love your sisters enough to risk everything for them. That tells me all I need to know about your character. Sophia looked down, then back up at him with a small smile. You're not what I expected either, Frank Holloway. Is that good or bad? Good, she said softly. Definitely good. The next morning brought new challenges. Frank rose early as usual to check on the cattle with Robert and found Sophia already in the kitchen, wearing a simple dress with an apron, her hair tied back as she prepared breakfast. You didn't need to do this, Frank said, surprised. I'm an early riser, she replied, flipping hot cakes on the cast-iron stove, and idle hands make for restless thoughts. Still, you're not a servant here. No, I'm to be the mistress of this house, Sophia said practically, and that means learning to run it. Ellen showed me where everything is last night. Frank couldn't help but admire her efficiency. By the time her sisters came downstairs, rubbing sleep from their eyes, Sophia had prepared a hearty breakfast. Even Robert and the ranch hands seemed impressed when they arrived for the morning meal. Over the next week, a routine began to establish itself. Frank went about his ranch work, leaving before dawn most days to check on the herds with his men. Sophia took charge of the household, with Margaret assisting her. Elizabeth, who was 17, revealed herself to be an excellent cook, while 15-year-old Catherine discovered a love for the ranch's horses and spent hours in the stables whenever she could. Frank found himself looking forward to evenings most of all. After supper, they would often sit in the parlor together. Sometimes Sophia would read aloud. She had brought several books with her, despite the limited space in her trunk. Other times, Margaret would play the piano that had sat silent for years. Elizabeth proved to have a lovely singing voice, and Catherine would often pull Frank into conversations about the horses. It was during these evenings that Frank began to truly know the Andrews sisters not just as his unexpected wards, but as individuals. Margaret, at 19, was quieter than her older sister, but possessed a dry wit that emerged when she was comfortable. She was an accomplished pianist and had been studying to become a music teacher in Boston. Elizabeth, 17, was the most romantic of the sisters, always asking questions about local dances and gatherings. She had golden red hair and a smattering of freckles across her nose that she detested but Frank found charming. Catherine, the youngest at 15, was all energy and curiosity. She had the least memory of their life in Boston and seemed to adapt most quickly to ranch life, following Timothy around and asking endless questions about the animals. And Sophia Frank found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength. She carried the weight of responsibility for her sisters with grace, never complaining even when fatigue shadowed her eyes. She was well-read and articulate, capable of discussing everything from literature to politics, yet practical enough to learn how to make soap from Ellen and how to preserve vegetables from Mrs. Patterson. 2 weeks after the sisters' arrival, Sophia approached Frank one evening as he sat on the porch. It had become their habit to share a few quiet moments there after everyone else had retired. "I've been thinking," she began, settling into the chair beside him, "that we should discuss our wedding." Frank felt his heart quicken. "I didn't want to rush you." "I appreciate that," Sophia said, "but we had an agreement and I intend to honor it. Moreover, it would lend legitimacy to our situation. I've noticed some curious glances in town." Frank had noticed them too. While most of the townsfolk had been welcoming to the Andrews sisters, there had been whispers about propriety, 4 unmarried women living in a bachelor's home. "What are you proposing?" Frank asked. "A simple ceremony, perhaps next Sunday after church." Reverend Walker mentioned he would be happy to officiate whenever we're ready. Frank nodded slowly. "If you're certain, that would be fine with me, but Sophia—" He reached across the space between them, touching her hand lightly. "I want you to be sure. This isn't just about an arrangement anymore, not for me." Sophia looked at their hands, then up at his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean that these past weeks, watching you with your sisters, getting to know you, I find myself hoping for more than just a practical marriage." Color rose in Sophia's cheeks, visible even in the moonlight. I've been feeling the same," she admitted softly. "I didn't expect to, but—" Frank turned her hand over in his, lacing their fingers together. "Then let's be married on Sunday, not because of our arrangement or what people might say, but because we're choosing each other." Sophia's smile was radiant. "I would like that very much." The wedding preparations became the focus of the household over the next few days. Mrs. Patterson and Ellen helped the sisters prepare Sophia's dress, a lovely blue gown that had been her mother's, altered to fit her perfectly. Margaret and Elizabeth decorated the church with wildflowers, while Catherine, to everyone's amusement, insisted on training one of the ranch's gentler horses to pull a special wagon for the newlyweds. On Sunday morning, the church in Yosemite was filled to capacity. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the marriage of Frank Holloway, one of the county's most eligible bachelors, to the mysterious Eastern lady who had arrived with her 3 sisters in tow. When Sophia walked down the aisle on Robert's arm, he had offered to give her away. Frank felt his breath catch. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in an elegant knot, with small white flowers tucked into it. The blue of her dress made her green eyes seem even more vivid. She walked with her head high, her gaze fixed on him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Frank spoke his vows, he meant every word, and when Reverend Walker pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both tender and full of promise. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the oak tree. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Frank watched as his new wife moved among the guests, gracious and elegant, and felt a surge of pride that she had chosen him. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and her sisters had gone to bed, with much giggling and whispering to Sophia beforehand, Frank found himself alone with his bride in the master bedroom. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, seeing how she stood near the window looking out at the stars. "A little," she admitted, "but not afraid." Frank approached her slowly. "We have time, Sophia, all the time we need." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I never thought I would find this," she whispered. "When I agreed to be your mail-order bride, I was looking for security, for a safe place for my sisters. I never expected to find someone I could truly care for. And I never expected 4 Andrews sisters to turn my quiet life upside down," Frank replied with a smile. "But I wouldn't change a thing." When he kissed her, it was different from their kiss in the church, deeper, more intimate. Sophia responded with a passion that surprised and delighted him. That night, They discovered each other as husband and wife, and the last of the barriers between them fell away. The weeks that followed brought new adjustments as the five of them settled into life as a family. There were challenges, of course. Elizabeth developed a crush on one of the younger ranch hands, leading to a serious discussion between Frank and the young man about appropriate behavior. Catherine fell from a horse and sprained her wrist, causing Sophia no small amount of anxiety. Margaret received a letter from a former suitor in Boston who wanted to rekindle their relationship, leading to her first serious disagreement with Sophia about her future. Through it all, Frank and Sophia's bond strengthened. They learned to rely on each other, to share the burdens of running both the ranch and the household. Frank taught Sophia to ride properly, something she had never learned in Boston, and she introduced him to the poetry of Whitman and Dickinson. Their evenings on the porch became precious moments of connection, where they could speak freely about their hopes, fears, and increasingly, their love for each other. Summer arrived, bringing with it new activity on the ranch. The cattle drive to market would take Frank away for nearly 2 weeks, his first significant absence since the sisters had arrived. The night before he was to leave, he found Sophia in their bedroom, carefully packing supplies for his journey. "You've thought of everything," he said, watching as she folded an extra shirt. "I want to make sure you're prepared." She didn't look up, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Sophia." He sat beside her on the bed, stilling her hands. "I'll come back, I know." She finally met his gaze. "It's foolish to worry. Men go on cattle drives all the time. It's not foolish to worry about someone you love." Frank squeezed her hands. "Just as I'll worry about all of you while I'm gone." "We'll be fine," Sophia assured him. "Robert and Ellen will check on us daily, and Mrs. Patterson will stay here for the duration." She hesitated, then added softly, "But we'll miss you terribly. I'll miss you. I have something for you." Frank reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in cloth. "I was going to save it for your birthday next month, but I want you to have it now." Sophia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Frank on one side, the space on the other empty. "I thought perhaps we could put a photograph of all of you in the other side when I return," he explained. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "It's beautiful." She immediately put it around her neck, the silver gleaming against her skin. "Now I'll carry you with me until you return." He kissed her then, a deep, lingering kiss that spoke of his reluctance to leave and his promise to return. That night, their lovemaking held a new intensity, both of them aware of the coming separation. The morning of his departure was difficult. Elizabeth prepared his favorite breakfast, Catherine presented him with a good luck charm she'd made, and Margaret played a cheerful tune on the piano to see him off. Sophia stood on the porch, the locket visible at her throat, and waved until he was out of sight. For Sophia, the days of Frank's absence were a test of her ability to manage alone. Though she had Ellen and Robert's help, she insisted on taking a more active role in the ranch operations, riding out each day to check on different areas of the property. The physical activity helped keep her mind off her worries and gave her a better understanding of Frank's daily life. Her sisters watched her with varying reactions. Margaret, ever practical, supported Sophia's efforts and took over more household duties. Elizabeth thought her sister's newfound interest in ranching was romantic, like something from one of her novels. Catherine simply wanted to join Sophia on her rides, leading to several arguments about what was safe for a girl her age. 10 days into Frank's absence, a summer storm swept through the valley. Rain pounded on the roof as lightning split the sky and thunder rattled the windows. Catherine, who had always feared storms, crept into Sophia and Frank's room in the middle of the night. "May I stay with you?" she asked, her voice small. Sophia lifted the covers. Of course. As Catherine curled beside her, Sophia stroked her sister's hair. You know, Frank told me that storms like this bring new life to the land. The rain feeds the grass that feeds the cattle that sustain us all. He always knows how to make scary things seem less frightening, Catherine murmured. Yes, he does, Sophia agreed, thinking of how Frank had eased her own fears about their marriage, about taking on ranch life, about so many things. That's one of the many reasons I love him. Catherine looked up at her. You really do, don't you? This isn't just an arrangement anymore. No, Sophia admitted. It hasn't been for some time. Good, Catherine said firmly. Because he looks at you the way father used to look at mother, like you're the sun and moon and stars all wrapped up together. Sophia felt warmth bloom in her chest at her sister's words. Get some sleep now, she said softly. The storm will pass by morning. When Frank returned 3 days later, the sight of him riding up to the house, dusty and tired but whole, made Sophia's heart soar. She didn't care about propriety or restraint. She ran down the porch steps and into his arms the moment he dismounted. He caught her, lifting her off her feet in a tight embrace. I take it I was missed, he said, his voice rough from trail dust but warm with affection. More than you know, Sophia replied and kissed him soundly, not caring who might see. The cattle drive had been successful, bringing in enough money to make significant improvements to the ranch. That evening, after her sisters had gone to bed, Frank revealed his plans to Sophia. I want to build an addition to the house, he explained, showing her rough sketches. 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Your sisters deserve their own rooms, and I thought perhaps someday. Someday, Sophia prompted when he hesitated. Frank's eyes held hers. Someday we might need more space for children of our own. Sophia's breath caught. You want children? With you? Yes. His hand found hers. Very much so. Do you? I do, she admitted. Though sometimes it feels like I already have 3 children, she added with a soft laugh. They're growing up, Frank pointed out. Elizabeth is already talking about teaching at the school next year, and Margaret has been corresponding with that music shop owner in Sacramento. It was true. In just a few months, Sophia's sisters had begun to forge their own paths. Elizabeth had discovered a talent for teaching when she helped at the town school during a teacher's illness. Margaret's musical abilities had caught the attention of a Sacramento merchant who sold instruments and sheet music and was looking for a piano teacher for his customers. Even Catherine, still young at 15, was showing interest in veterinary work after helping the local doctor treat an injured mare. They'll leave eventually, Sophia said, feeling both proud and wistful. Make their own lives. But they'll always have a home here, Frank assured her. No matter where life takes them. As summer turned to autumn, construction began on the house addition. Frank hired extra hands to help, wanting to complete the work before winter. Sophia found herself increasingly involved in the ranch's operations, discovering an aptitude for bookkeeping and planning that complemented Frank's practical knowledge. Their partnership grew stronger with each passing day. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate with a glance, to find joy in simple moments together. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, and the house became truly a home. In late October, as the leaves turned golden and the first chill crept into the air, Sophia confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was expecting their first child. She told Frank on a crisp Sunday afternoon as they walked along the stream that bordered the eastern edge of their property. His reaction stunned silence, followed by a whoop of joy that startled birds from the trees, made her laugh until tears came to her eyes. When? He asked, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "The doctor thinks April or early May," Sophia replied. "He says everything appears normal and healthy." Frank swept her into his arms, careful now in a way he hadn't been before. "We're going to be parents," he whispered against her hair. "A baby of our own." Telling her sisters that evening brought another round of excitement. Margaret immediately began planning lullabies she would teach the child. Elizabeth daydreamed about all the stories she would read to her new niece or nephew. Catherine announced that the baby would learn to ride as soon as it could sit up, causing Sophia to shoot Frank an alarmed look that made him chuckle. As Sophia's pregnancy progressed, the house addition was completed just in time for winter. Each of her sisters now had her own room, decorated to her taste. The new kitchen was spacious and bright, with large windows that looked out over the mountains. And the final addition, a small room adjacent to the master bedroom, awaited its future occupant with a cradle Frank had carved himself from oak. Winter in Yosemite Valley brought snow that transformed the landscape into a wonderland of white. The cattle were moved to lower pastures, and life on the ranch slowed to a gentler pace. In the evenings, they gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and plans. Frank taught the sisters to play poker using beans instead of money, much to Sophia's initial disapproval and eventual amusement when she proved to be the best player among them. Christmas that year was special in a way none of them had anticipated when they had first arrived in California. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. Frank and Robert cut a tall evergreen from the mountain and set it up in the parlor, where the sisters adorned it with ornaments both brought from Boston and newly made. Gifts were exchanged, carols sung, and memories of past Christmases shared. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind outside, Frank's hand rested protectively over Sophia's growing belly. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed. "When my parents died, I thought I would always be alone. Running this ranch was just something to keep me occupied, to honor their memory." Sophia turned to face him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And I never thought I would find a true partnership when I agreed to be a mail-order bride. I expected a practical arrangement at best. Instead, we found love," Frank said softly. "Yes," Sophia agreed, "though it came with 3 unexpected additions." Frank laughed. "The best surprise of my life, those 3. Well, until this little one," he added, touching her stomach again just as the baby kicked against his hand. "He knows his father's voice," Sophia said, smiling at Frank's expression of wonder. You think it's a boy?" "Just a feeling," Sophia replied, "but I'll be happy either way." As winter gave way to spring, changes continued both in the valley and in their family. Margaret received an official offer from the music shop in Sacramento to begin in the summer. Elizabeth was asked to take on a permanent position at the Yosemite School for the following term. Catherine, now 16, was developing a serious interest in animal husbandry and had begun apprenticing with the local veterinarian 2 days a week. Sophia watched her sisters' growing independence with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. They were finding their places in the world, just as she had found hers with Frank. In early April, as the first wildflowers began to carpet the meadows, Sophia went into labor. It was a difficult birth, lasting through the night and into the following day. Frank paced outside their bedroom, alternating between prayer and barely suppressed panic, as the doctor and midwife attended to his wife. Margaret, Elizabeth, and Catherine took turns sitting with him, offering comfort and distractions. Robert and Ellen ensured the ranch continued to function, while Mrs. Patterson kept everyone fed and the household running. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, a lusty cry echoed through the house. Moments later, the doctor emerged, tired but smiling. You have a son, Mr. Holloway, a strong, healthy boy, and your wife, though exhausted, is doing well." Frank nearly collapsed with relief before rushing into the bedroom. Sophia lay against the pillows, pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. When she looked up at him, the love in her eyes took his breath away. "Meet your son," she whispered, lifting the blanket slightly to reveal a tiny face with Frank's chin and a shock of dark hair. Frank sat carefully beside them, one finger gently stroking his son's cheek. "He's perfect," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." "We need to name him," Sophia said. "I thought perhaps Frederick, after your father." Frederick Andrews Holloway. Frank tested the name. "It's a good, strong name." The sisters were allowed in shortly after, each taking turns holding their new nephew with varying degrees of confidence and awe. Catherine declared he would make an excellent horseman. Elizabeth wondered what stories he would prefer. Margaret hummed a soft melody that made the baby's eyes flutter closed. In that moment, with his wife, son, and 3 sisters-in-law gathered around him, Frank Holloway knew that his family, unexpected and perfect, was the greatest blessing a man could ask for. As spring turned to summer, life settled into a new rhythm centered around young Frederick Freddy, as Catherine immediately dubbed him. Sophia recovered her strength and resumed her role in managing the household and ranch accounts, now with a baby often nestled in one arm. Margaret departed for Sacramento in June, amid tears and promises to visit often. Elizabeth began preparing for her teaching position, creating lesson plans and reading educational journals. Catherine continued her veterinary studies, her natural affinity for animals making her a quick study. One warm evening in July, as Sophia sat on the porch nursing Freddie while Frank rocked beside her, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "It's been just over a year," she said softly, "since we arrived here, 4 sisters with nowhere else to go." Frank reached over to touch her hand. "Best day of my life when that stagecoach pulled up, even though you got more than you bargained for," Sophia asked with a smile, especially because of that. Frank's eyes were warm as he looked at their son, then back at her. "I thought I was getting a wife to help run the ranch. Instead, I got a partner, 3 sisters who became like my own, and now this little fellow." He stroked Freddie's dark hair gently. "I'd say I came out ahead in the bargain." "As did I," Sophia agreed. "I came seeking safety and found love instead." As the baby drifted to sleep in her arms, Sophia looked out over the land that had become her home, the golden hills, the distant mountains, the house now filled with life and laughter. The mail-order bride arrangement that had brought her west had given her far more than she had ever dared to hope for. A loving husband, a beautiful son, and a future full of promise. In the fading light, Frank leaned over to kiss her gently, then rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked. "For bringing your sisters, for taking a chance on me, for everything." Sophia smiled. "I believe we have many more adventures ahead of us, Frank Holloway." "I'm counting on it, Mrs. Holloway," he replied. "I'm counting on a lifetime of them." As darkness settled over the Yosemite Valley, the stars emerged one by one, bearing witness to the family that had been forged through courage, circumstance, and love, a love that had transformed a practical arrangement into something far more precious and enduring. 3 years later, the Holloway Ranch had expanded, both in acreage and in family. Freddie, now a sturdy 3-year-old with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, had been joined by a baby sister, Clara, who at 6 months already showed signs of her Aunt Catherine's spirited nature. The house that had once seemed too large for a single man now bustled with activity. Though Margaret had settled permanently in Sacramento, where she had not only established herself as a respected music teacher, but had also recently become engaged to a young doctor. She visited regularly. Elizabeth lived in town during the school week, but returned to the ranch every Friday afternoon, her arms usually full of books and her head full of stories about her students. Catherine, at 19, split her time between the ranch and her veterinary studies, having convinced the local doctor to take her on as a formal apprentice with the goal of attending a veterinary college back east in another year or two. On a warm September afternoon, as Sophia sat beneath the oak tree watching Freddie help his father and Robert repair a fence, helping mostly consisting of handing them tools with great solemnity, she felt a contentment that sometimes still surprised her. Clara slept in a basket beside her, one tiny fist curled against her cheek. The sound of an approaching wagon drew her attention. Elizabeth was returning from town earlier than expected, and from the way she urged the horses to a faster pace, she had news. Sophia. Elizabeth called as she brought the wagon to a stop. At 20, she had blossomed into a beautiful young woman, her golden red hair now worn in a fashionable style and her freckles having faded somewhat with maturity. "You'll never guess who I saw in town today." "Who?" Sophia asked, smiling at her sister's enthusiasm. "Margaret. She's come for a surprise visit and brought her fiancé to meet everyone." Elizabeth jumped down from the wagon. "They're staying at the hotel tonight but will come out to the ranch tomorrow." "Oh, and I have a letter from Catherine. She's received word that she's been accepted to the veterinary program in Pennsylvania. She'll start next fall." Sophia felt a mixture of pride and wistfulness at the news. Her sisters were building lives of their own, just as she had hoped they would. Yet part of her missed the days when they had all lived under one roof, sharing daily triumphs and challenges. Frank approached, Freddie riding on his shoulders. "Did I hear that Margaret is coming tomorrow with the famous Dr. Reynolds in tow?" "Yes, and Catherine's been accepted to veterinary school," Sophia added. Frank whistled appreciatively. "Dr. Catherine Andrews has a nice ring to it." "She'll still be gone for years," Elizabeth said, a shadow crossing her face. "Pennsylvania is so far away." "But she'll always have a home to come back to," Frank reminded her, the same words he had spoken to Sophia years before. "All of you will." That evening, as they prepared for Margaret's visit, Sophia found herself reminiscing about their journey. As she stood in the kitchen kneading bread dough, Frank came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. "You're thinking deep thoughts," he observed. "Just remembering," she replied, leaning back against him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't brought my sisters? If I had come alone as originally planned?" Frank considered this. "I think we would have found our way to each other eventually, but I'm grateful for how things happened. Your sisters helped us become a family faster, gave us a foundation to build on." Sophia turned in his arms, flour dusting her hands as she framed his face. "I love you, Frank Holloway, more than I ever thought possible when I agreed to be your mail-order bride. And I love you, Sophia Holloway, more than I have words to express." He kissed her deeply, only breaking apart when Freddie came charging into the kitchen, followed by Elizabeth, who was trying unsuccessfully to catch him for his bath. The next day brought Margaret and her fiancé, Dr. James Reynolds, a kind-eyed man with scholarly spectacles and a ready smile. This was her family, forged through circumstances none of them could have predicted when a mail-order bride, and her three sisters stepped off a stagecoach in Yosemite. What had begun as a practical arrangement born of necessity had blossomed into a life rich with love, purpose, and possibility. Later that night, as she and Frank stood on the porch watching the stars, a habit they had maintained through the years, Sophia felt his arm tighten around her waist. "Happy?" he asked simply. "Completely," she answered, and knew it was true. The journey from Boston to California, from mail-order bride to beloved wife and mother, had been unexpected in every way. But as she leaned into her husband's embrace, Sophia Andrews Holloway knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, with the family she had both brought with her and created anew in the wild beauty of Yosemite Valley.